Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Rebecca Keppel. I love creating stamped backgrounds, and in today's video I have 4 different ways to create multicolor stamped backgrounds. Before we dive right in, I do just want to say hello to all of the new crafty friends that have subscribed to my YouTube channel. I appreciate every second that you spend with me here, and I truly appreciate every kind word and comment that you leave me. This video is a part of my Support Small Card Making Businesses series, and I will link to that playlist down in the description below. If you're interested in why I think it's so important to support small card making businesses, I will link to my first video of the series here. In today's video, we are going to use Concord and 9th products. I love their stamps and dies and really creative designs. Before we dive right into the 4 different methods of creating multicolored stamp backgrounds, I wanted to let you know to stick around until the end because I found my favorite and I think it's the easiest way to do it. But let's get started. Here's the first way to create a multicolor stamped background. This method is perfect if you don't have large background stamps. So if you don't have large background stamps, you can use tiny stamps stamped repeatedly on your cardstock to create a stamped multicolor background. So I'm going to use 3 different colors of Distress Oxide inks and 3 different hearts from the KITE strings stamp set from Concord and 9th. And I'm just going to stamp them randomly. Try not to stress about it too much, but make sure that you're filling in your background and using those 3 different colors to create that multicolor background. The littlest one is the last one that I do so that I can fill in any of the open spaces. It's easier to fill in with a tiny stamp than it is with a large stamp. Make sure when you're doing the largest one that you do stamp off the side. That's why I like working on my waffle flower water media mat, so I can stamp off the side when I need to and then just wipe down the mat when I'm done. And that it's a little time consuming, but it is a way to achieve a multicolor stamp background without any purchases of large stamps. Now I'm going to use the Concord and 9th Kite Builder dies to create this little pink and yellow cardstock kite that I die cut. So you can die cut the base of the kite, and then you can die cut these 4 pieces, these 4 triangles to go inside the kite. And I thought this time I would create that stamped background onto some cardstock that coordinates at an angle. I'm always very linear with my matting, but because I wanted to show the motion of the kite, this is a fun way to do it. So you adhere it down at an angle and then flip it over and then cut off anything that's hanging off the side, and it just gives it a different look. I think it's kind of fun. Now I am stamping the sentiment, which is hang in there, which I think is so cute with kite strings, and I am stamping that with some VersaFine Black Onyx ink because it shows up really well on colorful cardstock. Now it's time to put this card together, and I am going to use some foam tape to pop up that large kite. And I want to make sure that the sentiment kite really stands out, so I'm going to double up my foam adhesive. I put 1 piece down on my waffle flower water media mat, put another piece on top, peeled it right off, stuck it back to the kite, and then adhered it down to my card. That's the nice thing about working on the mat, is that it is non-stick, so you can do things like that. I'm going to put a little liquid adhesive behind those tails there and adhere that down. Of course, there's going to be some hanging off, so I will trim those later. And then I'm going to adhere the little bow, which is absolutely adorable. So many cute accessories in this die set to create a customized kite. So that method was pretty time consuming. Let's take advantage of some large background stamps, which make this process a lot easier. So I am using Concord and 9th's Scattered Dots Turnabout. For this technique, I am just using it as a background stamp. And I'm going to grab some ink cubes and ink up the individual dots in different colors. So this is really easy to do with ink cubes, and it can be done with really any kind of patterned background that the pattern stamps are a little farther apart. That allows you to get in there and stamp in each individual shape or image with its own color. And I love the way that comes out. It's absolutely adorable. So I'm just going to cut this down so that I can mount it on some colorful cardstock. I actually cut it to 4 by 5.5. So it's just on the sides that you see that cardstock coming out. Now I am going to be using those same Gina K Designs ink cubes to stamp on some Gina K Designs cardstock. So it's going to be a tone on tone effect, which I really, really like. And you can do this with the new Concord and Ninth inks and cardstocks as well. Now I'm going to use some VersaFine Black Onyx ink to stamp my sentiment on our multicolored stamped background. Again, that black ink, because it's a pigment, sits on top of the paper. It really does show up a lot better when you're stamping on other stamping or pattern paper or cardstock. So I love that sentiment. It's so cute, soaring by to say hi. Now I'm going to use some purple tape and I'm going to put the dies on the outside of those kites that we stamped, and then I'm going to run them through my die cut machine. Once they're die cut, I'm going to put them all on this A2 card. So all 3 of those little kites fit on this one card, and they're just so cute. Like I said, there are so many ways to customize this set because you have the stamps and the dies have tails, they have hearts, they have strings, they have all kinds of things, and then the stamps themselves are just adorable as well. You can do the kite with stripes, a kite with a heart, just so many options. And if you're using colors that work with the multicolored stamp background, I just think it really pulls the card together and creates such a fun, pretty look. So I am going to use a little bit of liquid adhesive, just a few dots on this one kite's string, because I cut out these tiny little hearts that are supposed to be kind of like the tails for the kite. They're just itty bitty little ones, like the little itty bitty bow that you see on the yellow one there. They're so tiny, I probably could have used a jewel picker to get them up a little bit easier. I am using my Spellbinders tool in one to use the poking end to get them out. So just kind of poke through the little hole on the one side of the die just to grab those little hearts out because they were stuck in there. For these little bows, I had actually used some Thermoweb iCraft adhesive. It's just a thin double-sided adhesive that you can put on the back of cardstock, and then when you die cut it, it has the adhesive on the back. So it just makes it a little bit easier than using that liquid glue, but you can do it either way. Whatever you have is what is best, right? Here's another way to use those large background stamps and achieve a multicolored background look. For this one, I'm going to be using Concord and Ninth's Marbled Turnabout stamp, and this really is a large background stamp. You can see that it just is almost filling up the 6x6 cardstock that I have put inside my original MISTI. So for this technique, I ink up the entire thing, and then I go back in and in little spots, I ink it up in another color. A great ink to use for this are those Distress Oxides because they layer beautifully. They don't mush all together like dye inks do, and you can see all the different colors. So I'm going to cut that down to about 4 by 5.25 and mat it on some blue cardstock. I did die cut a kite and the little interior triangles, and I'm inking the edges because it really brings out a lot of interest and dimension and depth to those die cuts. I love inked edges on die cuts. So I'm going to adhere all those pieces together with some tape runner. These little triangles and the kite are perfect for tape runner. You don't need liquid for that. I did use some Distress Oxide ink to stamp the sentiment, the "You Tug on My Heartstrings" on the smaller kite there. I think if you haven't tried stamping little sentiments like that with Distress Oxides, you will be surprised how beautifully they stamp. Yes, I usually stamp them twice, and that's why I use the MISTI, but look at how cute that came out. I just absolutely love it. And again, because it's the oxide and it does have some pigment qualities, it does sit on top of the paper a little bit, and so it doesn't turn into a brown mush. It looks really nice and blue on that yellow. So I'm going to decorate these kites again with some tails and strings, and these little, I think they are hearts, yes, these little yellow hearts have the iCraft adhesive sheets behind the yellow cardstock, so it makes it really easy to just peel and stick those down. I love using that adhesive with tiny little die cuts or anything fine and delicate like sentiment die cuts, or the strings from the kites are perfect for that. So you can see I added a couple more of those little yellow hearts as decoration to the kite as well. And I just think this is so cute, and the little swirling marble background looks like wind. Last but not least, here's my favorite method of creating multicolored stamped backgrounds. If you're familiar with Concord and Ninth's Turnabout stamps, you may remember that when they first came out, they were a little complicated. They're much easier now. They come with these acetate positioners that all you have to do is put the stamp down onto the positioner. Then you take this whole thing with the stamp and the positioner and you put it on the Turnabout jig. Now the Turnabout jig is very affordable and it's created with lines. So you line up the stamp and the positioner on the Turnabout jig, and then once everything is all lined up, you just close the MISTI door. And then you pick up the stamp with the positioner, then peel the positioner off. And then you're ready to go. You could put a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch piece of cardstock on the jig. I'm gonna use a whole 6 by 6 piece and then just rotate it around. So you're rotating the jig every time you stamp. But basically, because I'm using 6 by 6, you're not gonna see the jig corners, but they are numbered so that you know that you're going clockwise. Okay, so I'm going to ink up the first color, and of course I'm using my Distress Oxide inks. By now you guys know how much I love to stamp with them. And I'm going to stamp this down, and I can do this as many times as I need with this first color. So I am going to stamp it 2 or 3 times to really get good coverage and to really get the color the way that I want it. And that's the beauty, of course, of using the MISTI with the Turnabout stamps, because it just makes it a lot easier. Now you're going to turn this whole thing clockwise, one whole rotation there. I cleaned off my stamps and now I'm going to ink them up again. And this time I am using, I believe it's squeezed lemonade. And again, because it's in my MISTI, I can do this as many times as I need to get my yellow to look as yellow as I want. Once that's done, I'm going to turn the cardstock again clockwise, 1 rotation, and then I'm going to stamp it with Twisted Citron. And this one for sure needed a couple of stampings because I just really wanted it to look different than the yellow. I wanted to really show up as that lime green. So I stamped it a couple of times, and that's, again, the beauty of using that MISTI. So these Turnabout stamps are really creating this background for you in a matter of minutes. So easy. And look at the organic feel to those dots. I mean, I could never create this myself. I mean, I guess I could, but it would take me a long time. Whereas this was like turn and stamp, very, very simple. So I am in love with this new method of the Turnabout stamps where everything is so easy to line up and they kind of do all the work of the positioning for you rather than to have to draw the lines on the back of the stamp like you used to. Okay, I'm going to cut this down so that there's no white on the edges there. Now, again, I could have stamped right on an A2 panel and I would just put some repositionable adhesive behind it and put it on the jig that way. But I like to stamp the whole 6 by 6 and then cut it down where I want it. Now I stamped that little hello that looks like a kite string, and I put a little yellow kite that says "You're amazing" on it. And now I'm going to stamp a couple of hearts in this. Actually, I'm using some dye inks because I just wanted to use those little ink cubes on those little stamps, make it so easy, right? So I did some pink and some orange on the hearts. Again, with the dye ink, it does kind of sink into the paper a little bit, and when you have ink and then colored cardstock, it does kind of sink in, but I think they still look cute. So now it's time to ink some edges. When I remember about a technique that I like, I start doing it all the time again. So I did double up this kite so that it didn't have to be popped up on foam adhesive, but it did have a little touch of dimension. Just it felt like it was getting lost on the dots just a little bit. So, so cute. And then just put that down on a top folding A2 note card. And I saved a little piece of the the stamped paper that we created, and I put it on the inside of the card. I thought that was really cute. You could also do it on the envelope too. So I do have one more card to share with that same turnabout method. And this time I am using the marbled turnabout. So I put it down on the acetate positioner, and then I put the acetate positioner with the stamp over the jig, closed the MISTI door, picked everything up, and then peel off that acetate positioner and set it aside. And now I am just going to ink up this marbled stamp. This stamp I think is gorgeous. And like I said, you could use it on its own like we did in the beginning of the video, or you could use it like this. And I did want to show you how pretty it is when you stamp it with multiple colors with the whole turnabout process. So now I'm adding my second color, and that is the Distress Oxide Speckled Egg. So you can see the difference between speckled egg and tumbled glass. Tumbled glass is a much brighter, bluer color, whereas the speckled egg is more of that country French blue, you know? So it is interesting to see them next to each other like that. They are so different. And look at how gorgeous that marble is. I just love it. Okay, so for this one, I am going to stamp and heat emboss a sentiment on some navy cardstock. So I did use my anti-static powder tool there, and then I am going to stamp the sentiment with Versamark ink so that it will pick up the white embossing powder that I'm going to use. And I'm using my mini MISTI for this because it's not that big. So pour the white embossing powder on top, and then tap off the excess, and then use my heat tool to melt that embossing powder. And I just love the way that the white looks on the navy. Use some purple tape to temporarily adhere the die, and then send it through the die cut machine. Okay, now I'm going to use the iCraft Easy Cut adhesive, and I'm going to show you how I do it. So I peel off one protective layer and lay it down on the white cardstock. Trim off anything that's hanging off the side so it doesn't stick everywhere. I'm going to then put my die down on the cardstock side, and when I cut it out, it creates a sticker. So that little string is now a sticker. All I had to do was peel off that back protective layer, and it just sticks right down onto my project. So you can see how anything really thin like that is perfect with the iCraft. Next, I am going to use that same iCraft behind the yellow cardstock so that I can adhere these tiny little tails. Everything is so itty bitty, which makes it adorable. But if you have this adhesive that's like the thin sheets that you can put on the cardstock, it just makes your life so much easier. So I definitely recommend. It's not like you can't do it. You can absolutely use a little bit of liquid adhesive if you have that kind of patience. I do not generally. So now I'm going to use some white gel pen and just put some dots around the kite, and then I am going to adhere this all down to a top folding 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card base. And now you know my favorite way to stamp multicolored stamp backgrounds. So those are my 4 tips and tricks to creating multicolored stamped backgrounds. If you love stamping your backgrounds, let me know your favorite technique down in the comments below. If you want to see more videos like this, be sure to give this one a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so that you can be notified anytime I have a new video available. I want to thank you so much for stopping by today. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you again soon.